Hello, and welcome to episode 103 of Design Curious Podcast. I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. Today on the podcast, I'm going over project management and how I manage projects within my own company, as well as kind of a framework around how to have more efficient and effective projects run smoothly. And I also kind of get into why I really love the implementation part of projects and managing projects on site. So I think it's a fun discussion today, and I am going to have other podcasts that I'm referencing throughout the episode, and we'll have the links for all of those in the show notes. So anything that's relevant, you can go back and listen to those podcast episodes as well. And I would love to hear any feedback you guys have. Send me your questions if you have a question about how I run a project or a specific part of the management process. Don't hesitate to DM me on Instagram or send me an email, and I'd love to hear from you. All right, now let's talk about project management. You're now listening to Design Curious, a place where you, creative one, are here to learn about what it really is like to be an interior designer. And I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. If you're worried about how to succeed in a creative career, if you're ready to learn your next steps to become an interior designer, and if you want the satisfaction of doing something you love every day, you are in the right place. Grab a coffee, a notebook, and let's dig into today's episode. So if you're thinking about becoming an interior designer, most likely you will be asked to do jobs that are construction-based. I recently saw a post on Instagram that said, if you're solving a problem, you're designing, otherwise it's just styling. I thought that was a little bit harsh. I know coming out of college, I was definitely on the bandwagon of don't call me a decorator, call me a designer, because I've gone through all of this education. Now I really don't care because I do decorate as well as design. I believe there's no need to be a stickler about those terms. People use them interchangeably. So oftentimes, because the people don't really know, the public doesn't really know what a designer is, the definition is, what defines it, when you can call yourself a designer. And of course, that definition does vary from state to state or country, depending on where you're working out of. But for the sake of our discussion today, most people who are becoming interior designers are going to be asked to do projects that are solving a problem, and that usually involves construction. So you might be moving some walls, tearing up the finishes and replacing them, having new layouts in the bathrooms or the kitchens. And so you are going to be designing and delivering that design to your client. And then going forward, ideally, you are working with the contractor, the general, to implement that design and stay on task to make sure that it is done according to how you designed it for the client. So I was recently asked what is one of my favorite parts of the design process. Of course, the initial design of the layout and selecting all the finishes and furnishings is the major part of why we do what we do. That gives us all the feels. We love it. Is our element. Time can fly by without even noticing while we're working on those things. I would say the next thing that I really enjoy, though, in my projects is the project management phase of the project. Once it starts demo, I love getting on site every week to walk through with the contractor, talk about the areas that they're working on, opening up the walls, seeing if there's any problems we need to solve on the spot or any challenges that we need to rise to that we didn't see in the 2D plans as we were drawing them that might need to be now tackled on the spot. In most cases, designers will take on these project management responsibilities as part of their role and can act as a central point of contact between the client and the contractor and the suppliers for the job. So communication in this part of the project and project management is very important. It's important to understand when the client needs to be involved, when it's best to keep it between contractor and designer. And I say that with the thought to imply that it's not that you're trying to hide anything from the client, but there's definitely questions the client will not know the answer to. They don't need to get stressed out about how the solution is going to be found. This is where they can step back and trust the experts to solve that problem or to implement that design. And that's why they hired a professional to do it. So saying that sometimes we don't need to involve the client because we don't want them to get stressed out through this process. It's already as stressful if they're living through a remodel, even if they're not in the house and they're coming to check it every so often and they're seeing progress or not seeing progress. That is stressful enough, and they're paying all the bills. So we want to minimize their stress, and that's where the designer comes in. It's speaking with the contractor, answering all those questions on behalf of the client for their own good, for the betterment of how they're going to live in that house. And that's really what I love is making those decisions on behalf of the client that I think are really going to elevate the way they live in that house once the job is completed. So besides being the main point of contact in the project management for interior designers also means having a plan to create beautiful spaces that meet the client's needs while staying on track and within budget. And I definitely wouldn't enjoy the project management part of the process if I didn't already have great procedures and management tools in place to help me run smoothly through the jobs. So in my business at Rebecca Ward Design, we have a 7-step process that we follow with each and every project, no matter how big or small. And this gives us consistency through each project. It helps assure the client that the project will run smoothly. So we break it out into 7 steps, but each firm could break it out into 3 or 10 or 15, depending on how you want to organize it, but it should always run the same process every time. So our steps consult of 1, consultation. So that's where we get started. 2, gathering information. 3 is the design. 4, we present it. 5, implement. 6, installation, and 7, conclusion. And by bringing every project through those 7 steps, we are better able to ensure that the project runs smoothly. I'm going to run through the 7 steps here and kind of talk a little bit more in detail about what is happening in each of those steps so that maybe you as a designer starting out will be able to have some kind of framework for running your projects as well. So we always start with a consultation. Step 1, consult. And even before that, of course, we are doing our free discovery calls with the client to make sure they're a good fit before we even get to the consultation. It's a paid consultation. We're working while we're there and using all of our design expertise and gathering all of the information about the client, understanding their needs, their preferences, their likes. And then we are able to condense all of that into the project scope and write the contract and supply them with how much we need for a retainer. So that's all in step 1. And then step 2, once they sign the contract, we are able to come back to the site. We'll gather the information, take measurements of the site to create our as-built plans. Then we will photograph everything, the existing conditions, so that we can reference it when we're drafting up our plans, but also as we're designing, we might think, oh, was there a piece of trim around that window or not? So when we're designing the window coverings, we need to know. Things like that will be really useful by taking photos of it. Absolutely everything you can think of while you're there. And then during this phase, we also meet with the client again to go over their style and kind of the design direction that we're going to take everything and kind of get them to sign off on that direction so that by the time we get to the presentation, they're not surprised by anything they're seeing. So that's the gather phase 2. Then 3 is design. And this is the fun part. Like I was talking about, we get everything together, do all of our drawings, our elevations, and we source all of the materials. If we're doing furnishings, we'll do that. any lighting, decorative lighting fixtures. We prepare our plans for a bid when we send them to the contractor to give us a preliminary bid based on all of our finished selections and gather anything that might be a cost in the project. We at least have an estimate for it if we don't know the exact cost, so that by the time we get to step 4, presentation, and presenting all these things, we know almost down to the penny everything that the client should be expected to spend on the project. And like I said before, we have a 20% contingency. We also add on to that budget so that in case there's surprises, there's room for it in their budget already. So that's presentation as well. So from 3 design to presentation, that can take, we usually say 6 to 8 weeks, but sometimes it's even more depending on how much detail we need to put into the project, or if we're waiting for some specialty finish sample to come in, that can always take a couple weeks. And so we might extend that process. I know some designers that take maybe 4 months to really go through their design phase thoroughly, and that's fine. I mean, it should take as long as it takes, because this is the most important step in the design, is figuring out all of the details, and you don't want to rush that process. You want it to be the best it can be for your client. Okay, so moving on, we did 3 design, 4 present, 5 implement. So once the client signs off on the design and is ready to move forward, then we go into implementation. So this is the phase where we're ordering any furniture. We are signing with the client is signing with the contractor to start the process. We're pulling permit for the plans. We are doing demo day and then doing all the construction. So 5, the implementation is a lengthy process. And so depending on the project itself, it could be a couple months to a year long. Through that process is kind of like what I was saying. I'm on site every week through the demo and construction, making sure everything is going according to plan. And then we have a culmination of step 6, the installation. For install, we usually referencing furniture, like the finishing details. So of course, all along through the construction process, the plumbing and appliances and everything is getting installed. But installation, we mean, is like the final days where everything construction-wise is finished, and then we bring in those finishing details of the furniture, accessories, artwork, all that fun stuff, and then we can do our big reveal. Number 7, conclude final walkthrough with the client after the reveal for deficiencies, if there are any. And then we give them their binder and all of the warranties and everything along with that. Then they get to go and live a happy life in their new home. So that is the process we take through every project. That's our project management. So having those tools in place is so helpful to be able to have a site binder, which we've referenced before in other episodes, and we'll link in the show notes. Having the site binder, having the client binder, and then having internally our own process. So we use several different software to help us stay on track and manage these projects and make sure that we're not missing anything every time. Like I've said before, in Asana, we have all of our tasks for each step of the process set up in a template. And so we can pull that forward every time we sign a new contract with a client. Immediately, there's hundreds of tasks that get assigned to that project, and then we can assign a date as they become relevant and assign it to whomever in my firm is going to take care of that. Having that template has been a game changer. Several years ago, we probably didn't have that, and we were just retyping all the tasks as we started walking through the project. Even though we kind of had a loose framework, having those specific tasks in there now is really helpful. So we make sure we're not forgetting anything. Asana also helps us stay on top of all the communications we need to do, because it helps us to remember who in the project we need to contact and when. And then Harvest, which is our time tracking software, helps us keep track of all the time we're spending on the project and then invoicing it to the client. And what's nice in Harvest is that it also has a budget that you can set for each project. So as you're billing time against the project, you can kind of see like, well, initially we estimated that it's going to be $60,000 for the design phase of this project. And, depending on how far we are along in the project, we kind of see how accurate we're being against that initial estimate. Sometimes it goes over, sometimes it hits right on the spot when we're doing that final deficiency walkthrough with a client. And we're like, this is exactly where we thought we would be for design hours. But once in a while, or, I'd say at least 30% of the time, we will go over budget. That's mainly because there's been an unforeseen obstacle that we had to spend extra hours working around. And of course, we do warn the client about that ahead of time. And then once in a while, on a rare occasion, we will be under budget on our time. And so that's always nice for the client as well. So all of these tools and systems that we have really help us to manage our projects efficiently and effectively and have happier clients in the end, have happy tradespeople in the end. A lot of our contractors give us great feedback for our drawing packages, for our site binders, because we're so organized and everything's in one place that it makes their job so much easier. Helping to give designers a better reputation amongst contractors is a good thing. So that is kind of the summary of project management, that kind of how I work through my company, what I found has worked best for me. And hopefully that is a help for you as you are approaching your first project or working with a designer and doing a first project with them. This will give you a little bit more confidence on how to manage those. So there we have it, how we run our projects at Rebecca Ward Design, and hopefully that's a helpful insight for you. And maybe you will find as well that you love being on site, figuring out the puzzles, the problems, and problem solving with the contractor like I do. And if you do, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget, you can get more from me. There's some great downloads for you in the show notes. And you can check out My Design Mentor, which is my online mentoring platform, where we can work together to help get your career started the right way. You can find all those details in the show notes. And that is it for this week. Until next week, stay creative. Thanks for listening. If you love this episode, please leave a rating and a review. This helps me reach other curious creatives like you. If you have a topic request or would like to contact me, simply head over to my website, rwarddesign.com, or email me at podcast@rwarddesign.com.